All right, so I am back. For those of you who didn't see my breaking segment yesterday on Trump and E. Jean Carroll, my name is Mac. I go by Good Politic Guy, and I am going to be sort of filling in for Kyle Kulinski as he is off enjoying his honeymoon right now with the one and only crystal ball. So, with that being said, we got a lot to get into here, okay? We got some absolutely wild stories that have broken just over the last couple of days. We have George Santos, a major update on probably one of the single most prolific liars in the history of American politics, which is honestly saying a lot because most US politicians are liars and frauds, at least to some extent. We're also going to talk a little bit about some Tucker Carlson updates with him sort of making his launch off return, obviously not on Fox News, but coming to twitter.com on Elon Musk's platform to launch some sort of a show. So we're going to get into some of that. We also have a couple other things, the debt ceiling, and maybe some other stories that we're going to get into here. So first off, I just want to start off with the update on the one and only George Santos, or Anthony DeValder, or whatever name that he happens to be going by on any given day. So if you guys remember, George Santos, obviously he was that Republican candidate who ended up winning his seat in New York. I think it was Long Island that he ended up winning on. And this was also part of just an embarrassing failure by Democrats during the 2022 elections to lose the House of Representatives, especially in New York. That was one of the states that ended up hurting them the most. And one of the people who ended up getting elected in New York was George Santos. And later we found out that George had basically lied about his entire backstory. Okay, not just like, you know, the typical politician lies where they'll exaggerate some things or lie about campaign promises about things that they don't really have any intention of actually fighting for. This man lied about everything. Okay, so I'm going to remind you of some of the lies here in a bit. But first off, you know, obviously I think that George Santos is almost somebody that I kind of respect in a very bizarre way, because I don't think I've ever known or heard of a single human being who has the capacity to lie and misrepresent himself in the way that George Santos has. But on the contrary to that, okay, on the other flip side of that, we also have some truth telling, some actual, you know, sticking to his core values here. Because we have an old tweet here from George Santos. He said, "Crime is at an all-time high in New York. We need the state's elected officials to do their job and keep us safe. 9 of the recently released criminals from Rikers Island are behind bars 3 weeks after their politically charged release. We are in desperate need of law and order in New York." And boy, did he stick to his word there, because George Santos, the man, the myth, the legend himself, has officially been arrested and charged. Okay, this is law and order, folks. This is what we love to see. All right, so George Santos here from CNN, they say he was charged by the Justice Department in a federal probe. All right, so what are they talking about here? Some of the details. They say that Santos, who was taken into federal custody Wednesday morning, is expected to appear at a federal court in New York's Eastern District, apparently later today, so I don't actually have that information as of the time that I'm recording this video, but this is what we know so far. They say that he faces 13 federal charges, 13, including 7 counts of wire fraud, 3 counts of money laundering, 1 count of theft of public funds, and 2 counts of making materially false statements to the House of Representatives. Okay, again, you almost kind of gotta respect the hustle in a way for somebody to be this prolific of a criminal and a fraudster. Okay, 13 federal charges. Absolutely amazing. So they continue here with some more details. They say the freshman congressman who was elected last year to represent a district that includes parts of Long Island and Queens has been under investigation in multiple jurisdictions and by the House Ethics Committee. Top Democrats, joined by some New York Republicans, have been calling on Santos to resign over allegations ranging from criminal behavior on the campaign trail to petty personal dishonesty stretching back more than a decade. Okay, so he's been in the business of lying for quite a long time at this point. But they say that House Speaker Kevin McCarthy said that he will look at the charges before determining if he thinks Santos should be removed from charges. He literally just said, "I'll look at the charges." Okay, so obviously we know that the House currently has like a pretty tight split. I think it's like 222 Republicans to like 213 Democrats or so, give or take, right? So obviously he's working with a small split. He doesn't want to lose anybody from his coalition, but like, really, man? Really? It's the outcome of this specific, you know, set of charges that he's getting. That's going to determine whether or not he deserves to remain in Congress, not the fact that he ran a campaign completely based on fabricated nonsense that he was selling to his own constituents. I mean, if that's not enough to get somebody removed from Congress, I don't know what the hell is. I mean, it's completely ridiculous that it has taken this long for a conversation, a serious conversation about this guy being removed from office, actually seriously taking place, right? I mean, obviously his constituents within New York, they don't even have a real representative because the person who they voted for is not the real George Santos. It's a completely different version of himself that he was selling to the public at the time. But they continue saying that during his brief time in office, Santos has been accused of breaking campaign finance laws, violating federal conflict of interest laws, stealing cash meant for an Iraq War veteran's dying dog. Let me say that one more time. He stole cash meant for an Iraq War veteran's dying dog. Really? I mean, that's where we're at right now. They say he also was masterminding a credit card fraud scheme. I believe that's the one that was in Brazil, actually, and lying about where he went to school and worked. They say Santos has admitted to making some misleading claims about his education and financial status, but continues to deny the more serious allegations. Well, buddy, we'll see how this plays out in the court of law. I mean, obviously, they're bringing 13 different charges against you. Probably one of them is going to stick. Is he going to get potential jail time? We'll see how this plays out. I got a little bit more information on that here in a second, but they continue saying during his victorious campaign last year, Santos ran according to the Republican midterm playbook, hammering his Democrat opponent over crime and inflation. The message resonated in the New York suburbs where GOP candidates flipped 4 seats on their way to winning a narrow House majority. Okay, so again, just want to emphasize the point that Democrats are also kind of to blame for this, right? I mean, obviously there have been some other reports about how because of the death of local media, especially within a state like New York, it seems like there were only a small amount of people who weren't sort of in the larger outlets that were actually trying to track this stuff and investigate this stuff. There certainly were many people who did know before this election actually took place that George Santos was a complete goddamn fraud at every single level you want to look at it. But the Democratic Party didn't expose that. I mean, they didn't make that the core of their campaign. They didn't bring up these lies. This was all stuff that we figured out after the fact. Okay, so what does that say about the Democratic Party? Now, remember, I mean, Sean Patrick Maloney at the time, obviously he's no longer in the picture directly right now within the upper echelons of the Democratic Party, within the establishment of the party. But a guy like Sean Patrick Maloney, he was one of the head finance guys for the Democratic Party, deciding what money should go where. He was in the state of New York. And you're telling me that in the center of this Democratic powerhouse with some of the largest Democratic figures within the entire party, that they couldn't figure out that a guy who was winning an election within their own state, that was a race that presumably they should have won. I mean, definitely at least against a guy like George Santos, obviously, right? That they couldn't expose any of this beforehand. They couldn't make this a part of their campaign. I mean, the fact that George Santos beat the Democratic candidate in and of itself shows you the incompetence of this party that we're talking about here. But now I got another interesting point here, because apparently, even though he's facing these charges, even though he's been exposed as a complete and utter fraud, apparently he can still remain in Congress as this plays out, right? Obviously, we just saw Kevin McCarthy. He's saying he's basically going to take a wait and see approach to this situation. But they also say here, according to the law, which this is honestly really interesting, they say the charges do not, from a legal standpoint, affect Santos's status as a member of Congress. Nothing in the Constitution's requirement for congressional office bars individuals under criminal indictment or conviction from serving, except for the 14th Amendment, which prohibits for certain treasonous conduct committed after a member has taken the oath of office. So it doesn't really seem like that would actually apply in this scenario, but they say under the former rules for the U.S. House of Representatives, according to a Congressional Research Service report, quote, an indicted member may continue to participate in congressional proceedings and considerations. So as this is all unfolding, presumably we could see George Santos still participating in the conversation on different pieces of legislation, right? They say, however, if a member is convicted of a crime, which obviously he hasn't been at this point, that could result in a punishment of 2 or more years in prison, they are instructed under House rules not to participate in votes on the floor or in committee votes. But also it seems like that's just sort of like a suggestion, right? Like this isn't like a legal precedent. This is just like the House rules where they, it's etiquette basically, like, oh, if you're, convicted of this kind of a crime, then maybe you shouldn't be participating in House votes on certain things. So that seems like that might not even be enforceable at the end of the day, but we'll have to see how this plays out. So a little bit of more interesting information here from this Vice article that I found. So just a little bit more details in terms of some of the things that he has been doing recently. So they said that prosecutors accused Santos. All right. So we got the wired fraud allegations, we got the campaign finance fraud allegations, all of those different things, right? They say that he also, okay, was embezzling campaign contributions to buy pricey designer clothes. He was using campaign funds to dress himself up. Okay, that's who we're talking about here. He was also using the money to give handouts to his own associates. So, I mean, that's just a straight up crime, right? I mean, if they could demonstrate this in the court of law, that seems pretty open and shut, right? But they say he also received $24,000 worth of unemployment during the pandemic, even though he had a job and was pulling down a $120,000 a year salary, according to the indictment unsealed on Wednesday morning. So he was collecting unemployment while he was already getting a salary of over $100,000. Okay, what a complete joke of a human being. But it's not even just this aspect of it, because guess what? George Santos was also part of a Republican coalition that was pushing for more work requirements for unemployment benefits. Okay, that's who George Santos is. So him personally, he can go collect this money, tens of thousands of dollars in unemployment, while he has a job paying him a very hefty salary. But he thinks other Americans, people on the bottom rung of the ladder, the poorest Americans who are actually unemployed, that they should be facing more austerity, okay, more restrictions on actually being able to get that unemployment check, okay, when they might actually deserve it, especially coming at a time where we're talking about a Federal Reserve that is pushing with these interest rates explicitly with the openly stated goal to push millions of people out of work, given the current state of the economy. Okay, so we have a federal policy that is deciding to push people out of work. We have Republicans who are trying to stricten or, to make these work requirements and pushing this austerity and make it much more strict for some of these social programs. And some of these Republicans, like George Santos, are literally collecting the checks themselves. I mean, it's completely absurd, right? But they continue here. They say prosecutors also charge Santos with lying on federal disclosure forms and misleading Congress about his finances. And they say Santos faces a maximum 20 years in prison, 20 years in prison if he is convicted on the top charges against him. Okay, so at this point, we don't really know like what is the likelihood that they're actually going to get him on the maximum prison time or the top charges that they were leveling against him. I don't really have any like barometer to be able to tell you guys the likelihood of that outcome actually taking place. If I had to guess, I obviously don't think that he's going to get the maximum years of or maximum sentence of 20 years in prison, or that all of these charges are going to stick against him. But in all likelihood, it could be some, right? I mean, that's not too much of a stretch to say that maybe 1, 2, 3, I mean, there's 13 charges. Some of them got to stick against him, and presumably maybe he might actually end up serving some time. At the very bare minimum, obviously this guy shouldn't still be in Congress, right? But so with those charges being laid out, that's sort of the current information that I have at my disposal right now. Now I want to just remind you guys of some of the absolutely amazing lies that we have heard from George Santos. I mean, again, I've never seen something like this, okay? I've seen liars. I've seen Joe Biden lie. I've seen Donald Trump lie. I've seen Obama and Bush and the rest of them lie. Bush probably had some of the most egregious lies, especially with the Iraq War and all of that stuff. But, this guy is just like lying in a completely different realm, okay? He's operating on a different plane of lying because, again, it's not just some big lies every once in a while. It's the whole deal, lying about every single possible aspect of himself that you could possibly lie about. So here's just some of them. We're just going to touch on these for a second here. They say here from New York Magazine. So they accuse him of lying and theft, among other charges. They say he lied and collected, again, those unemployment benefits. He lied about where he went to high school and college. He lied about working on Wall Street. They say his campaign bio states that he worked at Goldman Sachs and Citigroup, but representatives for both companies told the Times they had no record of his employment. Just making that shit up. Isn't that amazing, right? You just say, oh, I worked at Goldman Sachs and Citigroup. And then on top of that, he was coming out at the time and saying like, oh, I had this brave moment where I was standing up to these corrupt elitist executives. And then it turns out like, dude, you didn't even work there. You never worked at these places, right? Okay, so they continue. So he has some shady money connections, right? Apparently he has like, hundreds of thousands of dollars that are coming out of shady places. We don't even really know where a lot of that money came from. Is the money legit? As I point out here, I mean, he was connected to all of these different weird organizations. Some of them were like his personal LLCs. Some of them were potentially had ties to other organizations, and people don't really know the actual underlying details of where a lot of his campaign money was coming from. They say he lied about founding an animal charity. Nice, just amazing. They say he allegedly, again, swindled a disabled vet whose dog was dying. You're gonna swindle a disabled vet's dying dog. All right, that's the kind of person that you are. I don't know that it gets worse than this, but let's see. They say he also ripped off an Amish dog breeder. He's going after the Amish, man. Okay, ripped off an Amish dog breeder with a bad check. Okay, what's the deal with his marriages? Again, this was another confusing thing where like he was married to a woman, but then he was running his campaign as a proud gay man, which obviously is completely fine. But there was a lot of confusion about when did you end this marriage? When did you get with your boyfriend? Were you married to your boyfriend? Because, there's all this confusion about like, okay, you didn't say that you were actually married. Apparently the boyfriend he was with said that he never agreed to be married to him at the time. I mean, it's just a whole shit show going on with this guy's personal life as well. They say it's unclear if his mother's death was related to 9/11. Lying about your mom being involved in 9/11. Great. They say his grandmother was definitely not a Holocaust victim. Lied about his grandmother being in the Holocaust. He did not have employees who died in the Pulse shooting. He lied about having employees who were shot in a mass shooting at the Pulse nightclub. Okay, the famous, of course, Jewish or Jewish, saying that he was Jewish and then later saying, oh no, I didn't mean that I'm actually Jewish. I meant I'm like sort of like a Jew, I guess, is the implication of what he's saying. Was he a drag queen in Brazil? Of course, these famous pictures that came out. Seems to me like it's very clearly him in these pictures. I guess he's denied it, but it looks pretty clear. And this is not really an HD picture. Some of the more HD ones, it seems pretty cut and dry. These are some that I didn't even hear about. Was George Santos on Hannah Montana? I guess he lied about being on Hannah Montana. Was he in this Spider-Man Turn Off the Dark Broadway musical production as a producer? Okay, was he actually a journalist in Brazil? Okay, I mean, so many of these. We could go on and on and on until the end of time. Okay, so listen, I mean, it's a little bit refreshing, obviously, to see some member of Congress finally be held accountable, at least in a small way, for just like rampant fraud and rampant lies and rampant, absurd behavior right within Congress. But at the same time, it's like, we could remove this guy from Congress. We're still going to have a bunch of criminals in Congress, right? We're still going to have people who are pushing for endless wars, people who are pushing to, gut the EPA and deregulate any possible attempts to try to tackle things like climate change and doom potentially thousands of people, generations in the future, right, on this planet. Okay, we have so many different levels of criminality within our government. I mean, basically every single US president has been explicitly responsible for war crimes, right? There was that famous Noam Chomsky quote where he said, if you applied the laws of the Nuremberg trials to modern day, then every single post-World War II American president would have been hung by those standards. I mean, our government is just chock full of criminals up and down the ladder, not to mention the criminals on Wall Street and the criminals in the health insurance and big pharmaceutical industries and the fossil fuel industry. I mean, so many criminals within this country, but I guess we figured out sort of what the threshold is here, where if you're George Santos and you lie about all of these different things, maybe eventually it will catch up to you. And especially if you go beyond, above and beyond that, and you actually lie on like your campaign forums and you commit campaign finance violations and you commit wire fraud potentially, then it seems like we kind of figure it out. This is the standard where you might actually face at least a little bit of accountability.
Hey y'all, do me a favor and like and subscribe. It helps out big time in the algorithm. Click the bell as well for notifications when videos drop, and watch that video on screen right now. You know you want to.